is proud to amplify women's voices.
They are the experts of their own lives, initiating conversations within their community about challenges they face, the solutions they're working on, and the opportunities they see.
Please join us this Sunday from 2 to 5 for Women's Voices on Air. We know our challenges. We are the experts of our lives.
We are master multitaskers, prioritizing our family, friends, and our faith above our own needs.
Our needs and voices are too often overlooked.
Please join us this Sunday from 2 to 5 p.m. for Women's Voices on Air.
We tell our stories in our own way.
You're listening to RainierAvenueRadio.world.
You're listening to Heartbeat Radio. I'm your host, Cindi Bright. Heartbeat Radio is a conversation aimed to take the pulse of corporate America. Opportunities for people of color, we're getting lost in the shuffle of change. I'm that provocateur of change. The hearts of corporate America are addressed. Access and opportunities will be accelerated for all people. Through Heartbeat Radio, you will gain a deeper understanding of what is necessary for change.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Heartbeat Radio on Wednesday evening. Joining me tonight is Tina Podlodowski, the chairwoman of the Washington State Democrats, and I believe she's changing devices right now. So I'm going to need about 60 seconds to have her on air. I will tell you who she is and what we are going to be talking about this evening. So Tina serves as the chair of the Washington State Democrats. She just came back on, so I'm going to let her describe to you what she does. But Tina, I know you changed devices, so.
My apologies. I was getting no audio off the other device, so my apologies for that. It was a bit of a scramble. Yeah. The new world of technology. Yeah.
Welcome to Heartbeat. And so thank you for coming on tonight.
Thank you so much, Cindi. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation this evening. So a little bit about, I guess, what I do in Washington State Democrats and how I even got here, because I don't think most kids grow up and say, hey, I want to be a state party chair. That's the job for me in working through this. And mine was really a bit of an evolution of a journey. As folks know my background for a bit, I worked at Microsoft for a while, was a Seattle City Council member, left that, went back into the for-profit sector, have 3 kids, and happened to be sitting in a kindergarten classroom for my youngest when my phone started to erupt, and was getting texts and emails and phone calls and voicemail messages. And it was the day of the Sandy Hook shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, which is just a few miles from where I grew up. So went into work the next day, quit my job, and with a few friends started the Alliance for Gun Responsibility. That got me back into politics and looking at statewide initiatives. That got me back into seeing how difficult it had been for so many people in Washington State to vote, even though we supposedly have one of the, quote, better, unquote, voting systems in the country, something that we've made some great changes to over the last 3 years. So that led to a run for Secretary of State, didn't win that, and so ended up being state party chair because there were so many things that weren't working for the state party, the Democratic State Party in Washington State, as I saw during that entire year of being on the road in all 39 counties in the state, running for Secretary of State. And so many of those things, I think we've made sort of a start at fixing, but so many of these things, we still have a long way to go in working towards this idea of a Democratic Party that is truly a big tent party and about inclusion, about equity, and about making sure that this promise that this country is America is fulfilled for everyone.
What is your role as the chair?
Sure. As the chair, I sort of run the staff operation and think of us as the infrastructure for the Democratic Party. When most people think of the Democrats, they probably think of the DNC, the Democratic National Committee at the national level. The DNC charters 50 state parties and then 7 territorial parties. So for places like Guam and Puerto Rico, and each of us are a small operation in that way. And we do a lot of the work to make sure that our candidates essentially have the roads they can drive their campaign cars on. So for us, it's about data and making sure we have the best voting data available and data about who they need to be talking to be able to win. It's about organizing, get out the vote efforts. And we do a ton of those different efforts. And especially twice every 4 years, the most important efforts are these big efforts called coordinated campaigns. And we're in the midst of one right now. We did it in 2018. We do it in a presidential year where we can actually coordinate with our candidate campaigns, because otherwise that's illegal to do. And we could do get out the vote efforts together. And then the last piece is communication, making sure that we're talking to all the Democrats in Washington state, but especially the 88 different local party organizations that exist in the state. There's 49 legislative district organizations, 39 county-based organizations, and then of course we have a 176 member state committee that I report to as state party chair.
Okay. I'm just trying to help our listeners to understand.
Yeah.
Most people don't know like how the whole system works. And so I want to make sure they understand that there's different roles and piece parts. And there's also the HDCC, right? The
Yes.
House Democratic. And so what
Yes.
do they do and what is your intersection to them?
Sure. So at the national level, when you think of the Democratic National Committee, you often hear of two groups, the DCCC, the DTRIP, and the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee, the DSCC. Both of those groups are essentially PACs, political action committees, and they raise money specifically for candidate campaigns and specifically for incumbents, but sometimes also for folks who are running for that party against an opposing party. So they'll raise millions of dollars to do that. At the state level, the HDCC will raise money for House incumbents on the Democratic side for their campaigns and for challengers against Republicans. And then the Senate side will do the same sort of thing. And we will work with them in some cases to do the work to recruit candidates for the different campaigns. Although since I came on chair back in 2017, we've taken an approach of every race in every place. So we really, as a Democratic Party, used to only recruit in maybe 10, 20 different races that we would call spotlighted races to make that happen. Now we try to recruit in every single race, in every single place, and give people an opportunity to run, to learn how to be candidates. And we have also extended that work through a program we called Rise and Run down to the municipal level, because the diversity of candidates that we were seeing in those opportunities just simply weren't there.
How would you describe the state of Washington State right now?
From
That's a loaded question.
That's a big question. Well, I think the perfect person to talk to would be Governor Inslee about the state of the state and everything that's working on there. But I could talk about it from a political perspective.
Yeah.
And to me, I think it's a time of change. And I think it's a time of particularly good change. And it's not just in Washington state, but something that's happening nationwide. As I think you're sort of seeing the Democratic Party itself realize the promise of a progressive future, and also realize, hopefully, the work on many promises that have been made that have not been fulfilled. I mean, you go back to 2017 for us as a party, and honestly, the party maybe had 5 employees. It was essentially making cash calls to be able to meet payroll. And it wasn't in a place to be able to do the things to sort of diversify from the same old, and the same old people running for office and making that a case. We did the work in 2017 and 2018, I think, to make those changes. And you saw some of those changes happen in the state legislature, where you had people like Deborah Entman or Mona Doss, Manka Dhingra, Emily Randall, who ended up running for office and winning for office. But are we to where we need to be? I would say no. And I don't think the Democratic infrastructure is in Washington state, nor is it around the country.
Well, before we get to that, I kind of wanted to get a little bit deeper on like what, as I'm looking at the coronavirus that we're in right now, this,
You bet.
we have budget shortfalls at the state level. And so we are now going to start having to make cuts at different places. We have small businesses whose PPP, Paycheck Protection money, is running out this month. We don't have unemployment extended. And so we are in this crisis this month. What are we as Democrats? What is the Democratic leadership doing about some of these issues? I recognize that some of the things I'm talking about need federal support, but we do have an idiot back there. And so, I know that our governor is much more reasonable and about how to approach and solve some of these problems. So can you share with the community what is being talked about in those spaces?
Sure. I think as folks have looked at the budget crunch, I think that there is a sense that there is not a need to make an extensive amount of cuts between now and the end of the year as we work through this budget cycle. Although some things have happened, people have been who work for state government some folks have been furloughed 1 day a week, and obviously the issue around unemployment and the unemployment security department is a big one to make that happen. So we have a whole group of legislators now who are looking at progressive revenue opportunities and how you change that. I mean, you saw, I think, recently what the Seattle City Council has done in terms of looking at progressive revenue opportunities and looking at higher wage earners paying a more fair share of their taxes. I think there isn't probably a single person, maybe on the GOP side, but there's certainly a single Democrat who wouldn't say that our tax system is upside down and our revenue system is upside down. And the fact is that we, as a percentage of income, tax poorer Washington residents far more than any other. So I think that there is a lot of work that's being done now to look at not small business B&O taxes, but taxes at the higher level, at the corporate level, going after those super big paychecks as well. So as you look at things like potentially a capital gains tax, as well as different sorts of taxes as we've seen in Seattle, will be things that people will be thinking about and trying to figure out from a revenue basis, how do we not cut anything? Because I think everyone is sort of in agreement. And I've heard probably two legislators, Joe Wynn, a state senator, as well as Noel Frame, who runs the budget side on the House side, talking about how we need to make sure that we are actually investing as opposed to cutting. To make sure that people are getting the services that they need and that we're not selling ourselves short around this. So I think you're going to look at a lot more progressive revenue opportunities coming out of the next cycle of the state legislature.
Yeah, I asked that question because before that question, you were starting to go a little bit into how far or where we've come and where we need to go to.
You bet.
But for these conversations right now, I think the fear that our community has is that we don't have enough voices that represent us. And I say us as a Black woman that
Right.
are going to look out for and saying that different. There's many people who have really good intentions, but it is a hairline difference between the intention and when they have to start making it a decision between protecting their own privilege and doing something that's right on behalf of the brown and Black people. And so I was asking that question for that reason, because we don't have adequate representation, none in the Senate and a small percentage in the House. And so how do we ensure that brown and Black voices and systems and education? I mean, we look today that schools are trying to be forced to be reopened again. How do we protect that?
Yeah, I think let me break that into two things to talk about, because I think that you're absolutely right. If you go back even 3 years, you'll see a Washington state legislature overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly male. I think we've picked away at that, but we haven't gotten to the point where I think that the legislature as a whole is representative of the people of the state of Washington and the reality of the backgrounds of the people of the state of Washington. It's interesting for us, we have sort of this part-time legislature, right? And that's inherently, I think, systemically one of those, the institutional racism right there. Because if you have a part-time legislature, you have to be able to have a job that allows you then to only work part-time part of the year at what your quote unquote regular job would be, and then the other part of the year being in Olympia. So that keeps a lot of people out of even running for office if they want to be legislators. So I think that that's something systemically we need to fix. The other thing is, I don't think that there had been enough, and there still isn't enough work to make sure that people of color understand how to run for office, what are the opportunities, and what does it take to be able to run for office, and recruiting people for candidates, making sure that they have the money to be able to run for office, making sure that they have the training to run for office. And I think we've picked away at some of those pieces, but again, not far enough. So you've got, I think in the 28th district, a tremendous opportunity to send Tawana Nobles to the state Senate from the 28th as an African-American woman. You've got people like Joy Stanford, April Berg, Jamila Taylor, Shirley Sutton.
So I've been hosting a lot of those candidates on the show here to talk about them. And, I want to commend the work that we're doing to help them, but we're missing a huge boat also, right? Because to progress diversity requires, look, do you know that I spent 30 years in corporate America? Like I was in
Yes, absolutely. So you know the deal. Yeah,
I know the deal. Yeah. And so we can't highlight the 5 people that we have. We have to focus on what's broken and not moving people through the system the way that they should be. And we've had several Black people run for office here. We 3, I think about an Aaron Jones, I think about a Nikita Oliver, and I know what my own experience is. And so though that to me is fundamentally where we need to dive into is what's prohibiting Black people from being able to win elections and get into office, right? That to me is where I think if we talk about the system, the systemic racism and the things that are impacting progress, I think that's where we start. So can we start there talking about that?
Sure. I think one of the things that I mentioned was this idea of a part-time legislature. Makes it really difficult for people who have real jobs and real lives, as opposed to folks, in that way. I think it's the same thing when you think about even county commission offices or other sorts of offices. We have a system that talks about, citizen legislators at all sorts of levels. Well, maybe that worked. It certainly didn't work for Black and brown people way back when, and it certainly doesn't work for Black and brown people now. You need to be able to make a living and do this work and be able to advocate for folks around that. So looking systemically, I think, at the changes within the system there, building a pipeline and giving people the understanding and the opportunity as well. I think we've made a start with things like Rise and Run, which is a program that we built back in 2018 to get people engaged at the local level and to give them online training and other opportunities. I think Emerge Washington has been one place that's been there. Places like Opportunity PAC that are now raising money for a group of, I think it's 7 or 8 different African American female candidates, because it takes money to run, and it's knowing what's the system itself in the way that it's set up right now, and how do you break down that system. Even within our own party, I think that there are things that we can be doing differently. One of them is the endorsement process. You go to do endorsements, and you've got, say you're running statewide, Aaron Jones can probably talk about this as well. You've got, 49 different endorsement processes around the state, and trying to get people to support you and work through those different things. And it ends up being an insider game as opposed to something that's really clear to understand how things like that work. So there's so many of those things that I think we need to break down.
I want to talk about the system. We do have. I'm watching the board of questions we have. So let me question really quick from somebody watching. Their question is, how willing are you to support highly qualified people of color who haven't necessarily held office?
Very, because I don't think that holding office is necessarily the prerequisite to running for office, for the first time. I think we put a lot in place around the only way to make and move up the system is, start at that level.
Let's dive into that, because to do that and to progress, brown and Black people, The way to do that is to not just focus on the vacancies or the seats that are opposing Republicans. You're going to start to have, and you already have. I'm looking at the races this year. I was one of those candidates, right? Like you're going to have Democrat on Democrat races, and there is no way around progressing brown and Black people without addressing the fact that they're in another Democratic race and they're either challenging somebody who's been in a seat for a long time, which I wanted to talk about tonight, or they're going to. And so traditionally, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you don't touch Dem on Dem races. Is that right? Or do you? Or explain, how do we navigate that?
Right. And I think that's a really important point, which is traditionally we haven't touched them, meaning we don't recruit people to run against Democrats in those races necessarily. Sometimes we do if it's a bad Democrat. For example, Tim Sheldon in the 35th district calls himself a Democrat, but he's not. So we recruit people to run against him. But traditionally, there is a lot of power in this idea of incumbency and not challenging incumbency. And I think what you're starting to see is this idea that incumbency isn't the be all and end all, and certainly nobody is owed their seat. Just because you won the election 2 years ago doesn't mean that you're owed the seat for the rest of your life around that. So, and traditionally, and I think this is something we're struggling with, is we just let people run at that point. Well, it's true then that the incumbent has already run, has built a campaign system. It makes it difficult for somebody to come in and challenge them. But it's certainly not impossible. I think the question is, how do you build an equitable system so that a challenger can come in and be able to compete at the same level around something like this? And this is something we're struggling with. Yeah. And this is something
that is so key, Tina. Is how do we do that? Because so let me just take another question. Another question is, are you willing to support primary challenges of progressive candidates over incumbent Dems who are not progressive?
I think what we want to do is make it an even playing field and let the voters decide, so that we as a party are not picking somebody.
But it's not even playing field when you're brown or Black. And so inherently, when people think that that's the case, brown and Black people are hugely disadvantaged to start with, because we don't have the same access, earning power, people who are wealthy that can support into our campaigns. We don't have that same system behind us. And so this is one of my challenges to you and to, listeners, is how do we penetrate that, right? Like, that has to fundamentally change, because we will always be disadvantaged. We're fighting right now for 63 cents on the dollar in business, right? Like, we're working the jobs while we run for office. We don't have wealthy white husbands at home putting roofs over our head, right? Like,
exactly.
It's not the same thing. And so from an equity perspective, sort of a rhetorical question, but what is the Democratic Party willing to do to provide equity into campaigns, number one? And number two, what is considered a reasonable time? And you have incumbents that have been in seats for 18 years and are still there, and they're heavily backed when they have challengers who are totally qualified but can't get the support that they need to get.
Well, a couple things. I think number one is no matter who you are, you have to be able to earn it, and you have to be able to do the work to make that happen within a campaign. And to me, that is more about, are you talking to your constituents and spending time with your constituents and building that people power, that organizing power to be able to win races? I think as we looked nationwide and we've seen these long-term incumbents lose, and in many cases they've been white men, and they've lost to brown and Black people, that they've done so not because the challenger has necessarily had the money advantage, but they've had the organizing advantage. And I think the organizing advantage and teaching folks and helping folks understand how to organize, how to build, how to essentially be able to communicate their vision to the voter and explain why the current incumbent isn't the person that has been delivering for them is something that we can do a better job of and help people with. We've Rise and Run has been a portion of that and helping people work through that and understand organizing. And I think it'll be an interesting year, frankly, because of COVID, to see how much organization matters as opposed to money mattering, because you have the opportunity to organize using a lot of social media channels. You don't have the opportunity to dump a lot of money into, for example, digital ads and things that incumbents would normally do, because Facebook and Google aren't selling those ads in Washington state because of the ongoing lawsuit with the Attorney General. So this is truly an opportunity to utilize those personal networks and connect people in a different way and organize in a different way that I think you're seeing makes a difference.
But do you think that even the networks of people who folks are able to tap into still bring an equitable lens to how you fundraise? Because we all know money is
right.
what wins, but our networks are different, right? And so we can't compete at that level in terms of the amount of cash that white people are able to bring in. So even in that space, and I'm just making a comment about what you just said, because I think it's important that people understand it's not as simple, I guess, and from my perspective of organizing. I think it has to do with access to power. And look, Tina, none of us are, I'm older. I think I'm probably older than you. Like, we know, we know how things work behind the scenes too. So we're not oblivious to the fact that when the Democrats want somebody to win, they make sure that happens. And so, I can talk about that more. We're going to be heading into a break here in just a few minutes.
Sure. Yeah.
But so I just wanted to leave that, because I think, I don't think we can ignore those sorts of things going forward. And I think that the solutions begin to come when we start addressing these root causes of things and not try to use the same script book that is clearly not working, right? It's clearly not working.
You bet. Well, I think campaign finance has a component of that. But also look at I also do want to talk about the power of low dollar fundraising around things like this, and how you grow through low dollar fundraising, and think about the money that has been raised in a variety of different campaigns. I still don't think that necessarily overcomes racism in any way, shape, or form. And to me, that's the issue that I know that I'm grappling with as a state party chair. How do we break this down in a variety of ways? And look at our own state party and break that down in a variety of ways, whether it's the endorsement process, whether it's campaign finance, whether it's, how do we feature different candidates or connect people into different candidates? All of these different things, I think, are ways that we've been trying to pick away at the system and work through the system to make those kinds of changes. But they're not there yet. They're not there completely there yet. And I think this is certainly, I don't know if you're going to talk about this tonight, a great time to bring up the issues that were raised by the political consultants of color recently in talking about this as well.
Yeah, I do. I do want to get to that. I kind of wanted people to kind of hear from you first, because I want people to understand kind of all this, the pot, you have your hand in a lot of pots, and these issues that we're trying to talk about are important for you to take away as a Black community. We'll come back to that. We're going to take just a 3-minute station identification, and then we'll be right back.
Half that up in sacks, I favor Black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's Black. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's Black. Look. Rainier Avenue Radio.
This is the news on Rainier Avenue Radio. Washington's population has topped 7.6 million, with growth coming mostly from those moving to the state. According to Patch.com, the Office of Financial Management shows the state has grown by 109,800 residents over the past year, a 1.5 increase. In the past year, net migration accounted for 76% of the state's population growth, with net births responsible for the other 24%. The state's population has grown by 931,700 people since April 1st, 2010, of which 329,600 people moved into King County during that time frame. Population growth has remained concentrated in five of the state's largest metropolitan counties: Clark, King, Pierce, Snohomish, and Spokane. Nearly 70% of the state's population growth occurred in those counties. The top 10 cities for population growth are Seattle, Vancouver, Redmond, Bellevue, Tacoma, Pasco, Kirkland, Richland, Lacey, and Spokane. And that's your news on Rainier Avenue Radio.
Sunday nights from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. It's K-Fox Night Beat with DJ Nastiness.
Bringing back the memories.
Bringing back the memories.
Bringing Seattle's hottest music.
Bringing Seattle's hottest music. Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
What is the coronavirus? Coronavirus is affecting people's ability to go unanswered questions about the coronavirus.
What's the deal with
I feel like we're not getting the whole story about the coronavirus. There are several patients at the hospital who are at end of life. What is the coronavirus?
Coronavirus disease 2019, otherwise known as COVID-19, is a respiratory illness that can spread from person to person. Patients with COVID-19 have had mild to severe respiratory illness with symptoms of fever, cough, and shortness of breath. There is currently no vaccine to protect against COVID-19. There is no specific antiviral treatment for COVID-19. If you're concerned and you have symptoms, don't go to urgent care. Call your provider or call the ER or urgent care.
If you don't have anyone's number, call King County's coronavirus line at 206-477-3977. Or if that line is busy, you can try 1-800-525-0127.
This message is a public service announcement of Rainier Avenue Radio.org.
Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Breaking radio boundaries.
Keep on running, cause the winner don't quit on themselves.
Half that up in sacks, I favor black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's black. Yeah. Yeah. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's black. Yo. Look.
Welcome back to Heartbeat Radio. This is your host, Cindi Bright. Joining me tonight is Tina Podlodowski. She is the chairwoman of the Washington State Democrats. We were talking in the first half, trying to capture a lot of stuff. Tina, before we took break, I wanted to come back to, we had some listeners asking questions, and then we can pick back up about where you left off. We have a question that asks, can you help create publicly financed campaigns which would make the playing field more equitable?
I think that that's something that we support, and campaign finance reform, certainly something that we support. I think that's something you've seen in the city of Seattle by the democracy vouchers, and that's been tested a variety of ways and has certainly helped a variety of different campaigns. I think publicly financed campaigns happening at the state level and frankly at the national level are the way to sweep this money and in fact, an entire industry, an entire lobbying industry kind of out of office that way. So absolutely, it's something that we look at all the time in terms of campaign finance reform, and also thinking about voting reform as well. I don't think that there's necessarily enough data to tell me yet how this would impact Black and brown candidates, but is ranked choice voting a better bet for those candidates? There's currently a few cities that utilize ranked choice voting, and the state of Maine, not necessarily noted for their diverse population, uses ranked choice voting. But that might also be a way to sort of level the playing field for different kinds of candidates in making that happen. I also think, remember, we used to have access, public access to far more airtime for candidates to be able to talk about their platforms, who they are, different kinds of debates. I think we have this great technology. What can we do to bring that back and host more of that, and that people can get access to, so that they can actually see the candidates in these sorts of situations? I think what happens with many candidates, particularly the ones running at a statewide level, is they make enough money and they raise enough money to go up on TV, whereas other candidates don't, and that can give them an advantage in being able to tell their stories. And I think different ways, like you, Cindy, with a show like this, because you look at some of the editorial boards that are in town that are making pronouncements about candidates. They're not necessarily predisposed to diverse candidates. So we want to make sure that those are all a part of it. And I think as a party, we've really made a commitment to work to try to break down what we can that we do.
So I decided to use my platform to bring, particularly because there is not a focus on what I'm going to call the underdogs in the race, right? So I bring on a lot of the people that are being endorsed by the party, but I'm also bringing on people that are not, have not received the endorsements. And so they are the ones, particularly, I mean, they're challenging other Democrats. And so when you think about equity and you think about what it takes for them to have the same access, I'm trying to offer that to them because I have this to help them do that. It is not easy. And I'm going to say we as candidates, I was once a candidate, don't have the, I need somebody to pull me or to help give something to me. And so back to kind of when we talked about, the diversity stuff, it does require some very different decision making and some very different things to focus on going forward. And no question, it is about helping us to give us access. And I'm going to get into that here in just a minute. We have more questions.
Great.
What are those of us who support quality candidates outside of the establishment candidates to do when we hear that doors have not opened to candidates because they are not the establishment pick? So that's a little bit of what we were just talking about.
You bet.
Yeah.
And hearing sort of what doors they are and how do we fix those sorts of doors. And again, the system, I think, was, if you look systemically, I think the system is definitely favors incumbents. I think the system has definitely favored more centrist candidates in the past. And I think anybody who comes in at either end of the spectrum, or somebody who looks different or sounds different, is going to be at a disadvantage in terms of how the whole system was constructed. But
how do we get the look? Let me go a different direction for a second because it's related to this question about access. But I'm going to put it in the category of behaviors, right? Behaviors of elected officials, and so. I'm going to my own story, but my own story is not dissimilar than other brown or black candidates when we have the audacity to challenge for a seat that in my particular case was already predetermined who was going to get the seat. That's not an opinion, that's a fact. There were so many things that happened along. But the experience of me even trying to engage with other Democrats, even you were at the East Side Democrat dinner that I spoke at, even for me as the endorsed candidate to be able to speak at that event, because that was part of because I was the endorsed person, had the ability to do that. I still had to fight the fact that the establishment wanted my opponent to win. And so they were fighting to have my opponent on stage too. And so there was just a ton of that kind of stuff going on, and they would not take pictures with me. I had an elected official who actually, the behaviors are atrocious to brown and black people, and we experience it all over the place. We can't be seen. They can't be seen with us. They can't take photo ops with us. They won't return your phone calls. It's awful. And when you hear other people describe what their experiences have been, this is part of the racist ecosystem of why it's just for candidates of color. So are you aware of these behaviors that are happening towards candidates and people who are stepping up for office?
Yes, and we are trying to break those in different places where we can. I can give you one example in Spokane, where the chair of the Spokane County Democrats it basically is gone. And a lot of the reason why was the behavior related to people of color and candidates of color. So that was an issue where we can do things like that. I think some of what you're talking about that we have not done as a party, though, is ask the serious questions about who are the local party leaders, and who are the PCOs in those areas, and what are we doing to diversify everything within the party so it's not just the same old group of people always doing the same thing that they've done for 20 years. And I think that that's an issue that we're going to be taking up in September at our state committee. We tried to do this around the endorsement process in 2018, but did not get traction at that state committee to do that. And I guess I'm really determined at this point to break that from an endorsement process standpoint, and also from a where are your people? How have you changed the way that you meet, what you do, who's in the room where it happens, to borrow from Hamilton, to make sure that people are there, that they are making these decisions about that within the Democratic Party itself.
So Tina, I do, I'm going to pivot because I want to go into the consultant thing too, but there's a couple things I want to say, right? Because the endorsement process, that is known on the street as the gatekeepers, right? The gatekeepers of the institution and the decisions. And so the HDCC, it's my understanding, has a lot of input or influence, or are the decision makers in who gets endorsed. I don't believe there are brown or Black people there in that leadership. I don't believe there are Black people in Washington state legislatures. There's none in the Senate. And so that's a deeper problem because even, you referenced the consultant raising issues around racism. Like, I read the article, I read the demand that they're asking. Can you talk to us about what they're saying is happening here? And can you talk to us about the response to that issue?
Yes, I think very much so. Sort of two sort of separate things, one related to the Senate committee and the House committee, and one related to the state party. I think for the Senate and House committee, it really was, are these consultants of color getting an opportunity to fairly compete for business, to work on these candidate campaigns and do this particular piece of work? I think on the Senate side, they've had a conversation, and there is a new process in place to make sure that people not only can fairly compete, but that they are forced to compete. So, for example, folks have to, whether you're an incumbent or not, you have to go through a process, and you have to go through a process that shows why you're making the choices that you're making, and it's going to get reviewed from that standpoint. They're still talking on the House side about that. From a state party standpoint, we had never gotten involved previously with candidates hiring consultants, or what the HDCC or SDCC did to hire consultants. And that was wrong. We messed up on that. We should have been demanding a better system all the way along to make sure that not only the consultants were there, but that the candidates were there and looked at in a particularly different way. So I think that we're going to continue our work with folks. I think we've had great conversations about it. And we have also been publishing, since we don't hire candidate campaign consultants, but we hire other sorts of consultants or vendors that we use. And we've always had a process. Yeah, we've always had a process to use WIMBY or union vendors. So now we're publishing exactly who we're using. Are they WIMBY? Yeah.
The real talk about this is I'm not questioning your process. I'm not questioning your intention, but we all know, anybody who's brown or Black knows the real deal, right? And the real deal is that we are given a narrative, but the backhanded and back-end conversations that are going on are in fact going on. And so that you would be surprised, maybe or maybe not, about how we all know all of these different things in the community and where we have pain points. And so my statement to you is that we have a pain point there in the HDCC and the way that decisions are made about consultants. That is a fact, right?
Mhm.
We have a problem with the fact that it's the criteria that has been laid out that
Right.
I can put bottom dollar from my corporate experience that the consultants that are, they're talking about the people who have the higher end earning power, and that's who they're referring to. It's all white. Everything about what is happening is white. And
Mhm.
so that's part of the system that is harming brown and black candidates. It is perpetuating the problem that we have, not just to want to run for office, but to actually get into office. So I'm going to pause there on that. Is there anything more you wanted to say about? Can you answer? I know you're talking about it.
Yeah.
But are you taking action? What actions have you taken
Yes.
with that?
Yeah. I think that we've come up with, and the conversations have led to something different on the Senate side. I don't think that they've led to it on the House side yet. So we've asked to meet with our House colleagues to talk about that. We've also asked to meet right after the August primary, because there is an opportunity then for people to change consultants, change business, open up this whole process once August 4th happens. And so we've made that commitment to do that work.
Okay.
Yeah.
What specific investments have you made personally into Black people?
I guess I'm trying to understand your question a little bit more.
So I'm seeing, on my business hat, I'm getting all these
Mhm.
emails that say Black Lives Matter, and
Sure.
companies are saying this, and those are words, and we hear words. And so as I talk to you, I
Mhm.
hear what you're trying to do, but I'm asking you on a personal level, what have you personally done to make investments into Black people? Or
Well,
have you?
we've changed completely our hiring process here at Washington State Democrats. I mean, when I originally got here, if you look at the staff, it was basically cisgendered white men. If you fast forward now to our staff, you would see that our staff is just under 50% now people of color. And if you add women, LGBTQ, disabled, we're almost at 85% in terms of
we don't, I mean, that's commendable, but we don't want staff jobs. Like, we want jobs that are jobs of influence. And so racism is about access and power. And so to address racism in Washington politics means you have to give us access and you have to give us power. And so the way that the system is set up right now is not allowing that to happen. And so do you have thoughts about how you can start to relinquish some of the power that white people hold there and help appoint Black people into seats? Those are the ways that white people are getting into office. They're getting appointments on their first thing, and they get in, and then you can't unseat them. So,
right. Well, two things about that. Number one is, for me, it's making sure that we have people of color in these jobs who will be the next state party chair, whether it's in Washington State or other kinds of places. So it's moving people through a process where they're getting trained and they're ready to go, and they're making that happen within the party itself. From the appointment process, the state party doesn't appoint, it's the local party organization. So the place to break that, and I think where this hasn't worked, is how do we end up recruiting diverse PCOs? Those are the people that vote in those areas, because ultimately that's the group that makes this happen.
But for the PCO to appoint anybody, the seat has to be open.
Well, that's what you talked about in terms of appointments themselves, right? You were talking about appointments and how people got there via appointments.
Yeah.
Were you talking? Yeah.
Let me come at it different, because
thank you. Yeah.
Sorry if I'm.
Yeah.
I was going to leave a recommendation with you. Like, I want.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Look, let me talk about my HR for 30 seconds here, right?
Yeah.
Every year, what we did to calibrate performance in the organization is we looked at, top performers, low performers, middle. We took a bell curve and we calibrated people against that. And it's kind of the Jack Welch model, the bottom 10% goes away. Why can't we start to think about that in the legislature and start to actually intentionally create opportunities for appointment process? And I will get into the PCO thing, but to do that, let's just say you take 10% of how many people are on the Senate? 47 people? Is there?
They're 49.
49.
Yeah.
So if you took 10% and called for 5 of them to resign and worked the PCO process to help get the candidates appointed, that's where access and change starts to happen. If we hold out and try to do it the way that it is not serving right now, then you and I won't be alive to, to get to 10%. Yeah. And so that's the call of action, I guess, I'm making with you on air. And one of my listeners says it's a huge commitment to change the system. It takes courage and heart level belief that transformation improves the system for everyone. So she says, I'm hearing Tina's commitment, which is setting a powerful vision for change. Keep it up, right? Like we have to do some things very, very different going forward.
I completely agree. And I think that we have to open it up for voices like yours and the people that are listening tonight who are putting those comments in to say things like that. That was something I had never thought of, what you just mentioned. I mean, and I immediately go to an operational thing, right? Because if you were to put me in a corporation, you'd make me the ops person of trying to, how do you take that idea and operationalize it? And I'm going to sit with that and think about that. And I'd love to talk with you more about that.
I will do that with you. It's a great way, right? Because the way to drive up, I have these conversations often with CEOs, like they continue to look at solving the problem by hiring a Black person. And I just had a conversation today where, I was told, our CEO really took the George Floyd and he wants to do this. And so my question to them is, what personal decisions did he make about his own leadership team? Because your website doesn't reflect what you said he said to you, number one. And number two, what sacrifice are you willing to make? Because let's just be crystal clear that white people will have to sacrifice in order for Black people to move ahead.
Right.
They're going to have to relinquish their power. And so, I'm totally fine with giving you a list of who I think the 10% is, but we could talk about that another day.
You and I might actually have the same 10% on our list.
So that, those are where you start to create access, right? And so
exactly.
People like me and our communities will go to work if we know that we have to influence that, PCO, which stands for Precinct Committee Officers, who are the people that do the appointments for vacant seats. But I just think we have to do something creative like that. And that way we're bringing in a team of people as opposed to an individual, because a team can move together faster towards the destination than having to buck all the things.
Well, and I think that the question then comes down to is, how do we make sure that if you are not a person of color, as a white person, are you someone who is anti-racist as opposed to just someone who's like, okay, yeah, diversity, inclusion, whatever, I'm fine with that. But how are you really making that change, and how are you really changing your power? Are you willing to not be the committee chair? Because that gives somebody else the opportunity to do that. I have always said that the person after me, the state party chair, I was the first woman in 25 years, the only member of the LGBTQ community. It should be a person of color who comes after me as state party chair. We have not, since Charles Rolland had, a person of color doing that, and Charles was there for a very short time. So how do we make that happen and work through those pieces? And I think you're right in thinking about some of these things in a very, very different way to break the systemic aspects of the system. Mm-hmm. But this is also what we're trying to do with this consulting group as well. We've made a commitment to to actually put together a contract and have someone come in and look at this for us and figure out how do we break that. And not just at the state party level, because that's only one piece of it, but it's getting it to the local level as well. And I'm trying to figure out up and down the system, where are all the places where it's broken? Yeah.
Is it by chance a consultant of color that's working with you?
It will be a consultant of color. We made a commitment that it will be a consultant of color that we would let the contract with, and we would work with the political consultants group to help us within that business, because they see it on a daily basis. It's not necessarily what they do as a business on a daily basis, but they know all the places where it's broken. And those are the people that I want to talk to, the people who have actually seen it broken and it's impacted their lives that way, to help us fix it.
How can someone like me help? I mean, I'm using this platform as a way for our listeners to know how they should be involved with this political process. What advice do you have for our listeners about how they should get active, and what can I do personally to help you move this mountain forward? Because I'm not
so we made the decision early on this year to, instead of have two different personnel in the field for coordinated campaign, that we were doing work with people that we would put together two constituency managers to really work with the African American community, Latinx community, AAPI community, and the Native American community. And so we have been working through those pieces, and we have someone, her name is KJ January, working with the African American community, who's very talented, from Spokane, so went through sort of the horrible racism that exists in Spokane, and is working to build this up in a different way. So working with KJ would be something to do this, but I think working with me, and I would love to actually kind of come back and see if folks want to give some of the great ideas, like your idea that you just had, in terms of, okay, get rid of the bottom performers. How do we make this happen? And how do we set this up?
And resolve the campaign consultant issue, because people like me we want to be able to work with consultants that understand us and our life. And so I think that's a really important aspect to it too, is to make sure we have the support that we need.
Well, and I want consultants that understand different lives as well. I mean, I think that been, if you look at the whole, I think, ecosystem of consultants within Washington State, there are many other opportunities for folks, if we work this right, to build this as a statewide group and a statewide opportunities around campaign consulting, because everything is just sort of clustered within Seattle, and it's in one way of doing things. And I do think that you're seeing the success in some of these other consultants in other elections, where they're getting people elected that nobody thought would get elected, and that needs to happen statewide.
Tina Podlodowski, it was the quickest hour of my damn day today.
Oh my gosh, it was too.
We are out of time. I am very, very grateful that you came on and had this conversation with me and with the audience today. I am grateful that you have acknowledged some things I think are important to our community to hear around making this progress for Black people in elected positions. If it's okay with you, two things. I do want to follow up with you about how I can help. And number two, possibly have you back before the election cycle, because we didn't even get into any of our candidates today. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, Tina. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Cindi. You absolutely rock. And I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Half that up in Saks, I favor Black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's Black. Yeah. Yeah. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's Black. Yo.